Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and recently on the channel we covered a variety of different class buffs that arrived to the patch 11.05 of the War Within expansion in the most recent set of patch notes, with many more classes receiving a variety of buffs and even some gameplay changes and talent adjustments, opening up opportunity for brand new builds to shine going forward in the Season 1 endgame content. And Subtlety Rogue is one of those specs that actually saw a significant bit of changes. Where Subtlety Rogues are normally stuck playing the Trickster playstyle, now they can fully spec into the Deathstalker build, which is focused on achieving the biggest eviscerates available with its Darkest Night capstone, but also allows Subtlety to tap into multiple different sources of pure plague damage. And the playstyle itself is actually easier to get into for Subtlety Rogues, especially if you've never played the spec before, because it is super straightforward, for the most part passive with just a couple of procs, but very fun procs to play into. And it also opens up some new gameplay and some build variety for the spec of Subtlety Rogue, whether you're looking to dive into Mythic Plus content for massive AoE damage or potentially some of the best single target within raid encounters. And I wanted to go over how to pick up Subtlety Rogue as a Deathstalker build and what talents you should be running if you're checking out this playstyle for the very first time. As always, if you want to see more guides like these for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first things first, the actual buff for Subtlety Rogue specifically came to not only the spec itself with the Black Powder ability dealing significantly more damage, 20% buff increase actually makes it very strong and comparable to the ability to eviscerate in pure AoE situations, but also the Deathstalker playstyle and all of its plague damage abilities and its plague sources, anything from singular focus to hunt them down, clear the witness, fatal intent, corrupt the blood, and even Deathstalker's mark itself. All of those things that do plague damage have been buffed up by 45%, which is a significant gain for the playstyle that's actually finally viable and very playable, especially in single target, but also with a lot of potential to grow in AoE. Though before that, definitely check out the guide video for the Subtlety Rogue for the updated version for 11.05 update. I'll have that link down and below. I'll have all of the different links down below in the description of this video as well, but also the best place for you to be able to get all this guide information about Subtlety, whether it's the basics, whether it is some of these newer adjustments, will be on our Discord channel, where we have a section for Subtlety Rogue guide specifically with all of the newest builds, all of the newest updates, and some of the different rotational things that you can find the written version on our Discord channel. But I want to dive into some of the different talents and hero talents and what exactly you could change and how the playstyle changes a little bit, piggybacking off of the original guide. So if you haven't seen it and if you want to get the basics, definitely watch the guide first. But this one is simply going to be an add-on to that original guide to add all the new information with the recent buff to the Deathstalker. Now when it comes to Deathstalker, we do have two talent builds that I recommend for you to give a go. The first one is going to be a raiding build, which is a very standard classic raiding single target output build, though instead of playing around with Trickster, it just plays around Deathstalker. But for the most part, it does a lot of the similar things to the Trickster playstyle as well. The single target build is also going to be going into improved ambush, as well as picking up the 3 capstones of Keeper Stratagem, Cold Blood, and the whole Supercharger mechanic together with Force Induction. So you will still be playing around the triple symbols of deaths in order to maximize the output of this build specifically, but you do make a slight adjustment in pure single target as Deathstalker compared to Trickster. Whereas Trickster picks up the replicating shadows, as a Deathstalker you actually are going to pick up Gloomblade instead, mostly because there's some interactivity between Gloomblade and the Deathstalker's Mark ability. As you apply the Deathstalker's Mark and you consume stacks of the Deathstalker's Mark, it'll buff up the damage of your next Shadow Strike or Gloomblade by 50%. So because it buffs the damage of some of your basic comp point builders, Gloomblade just ends up being a little bit more value for a global than a backstep, just because it does pure shadow damage, bypass an enemy's armor completely. Also, critical strikes also apply fine weakness, so like normal backstab, but it's just a slightly improved version of backstab that'll get a bit more value out of the Deathstalker's mark damage amplification effects as well. The Mythic Plus version of Deathstalker, however, does make a couple of changes, and I've been trying out a couple of different builds since this whole playstyle is very new and only been around for like a week. Nobody has really found the best build out there, but a lot of players have been able to get a decent bit of damage out of this playstyle, and it can actually do incredibly good, and we'll talk about that in just a second, just how good it can be in AoE. But the playstyle for AoE is going to have you play Elusiveness because defenses are important. You can feint off of GCD, so you're going to pick it up. You're still picking up Improved Ambush because Shadow Striking is still a pretty big core ability for us rotationally. We go into Deeper Strat to get the Supercharger and Force Seduction, and then go all the way down to a Vigor together with Subtlety, mostly to amp up our burst windows with our dances, with our secret techniques, to really give us some massive burst damage output. And over in the Spec talent tree, it does go into pretty far into the right hand side of the top here, all the way to Silent Storm, and it does end up going double into Finality and then 1 point to Dark Brew. Technically, you can take that point out and put it double into Death Perception if you want to have multiple charges of Symbols of Death, but picking up Finality 2 and Finality seems to be a better choice at the very least when it comes to AoE damage, whether it is for your Eviscerates, Ruptures, or even Black Powder spam within AoE content. But if you do want to get more damage, technically better choice is Dark Brew, which allows your attacks to deal nature or bleed damage, so your Ruptures that you're able to spread everywhere, all those abilities are going to deal shadow damage instead. Plus, it amps all of your shadow damage by 10%, which actually interacts together with the Deathstalker to a little bit, since plague damage is a mix of nature as well as shadow damage. So all of those shadowy elements also get amplified by quite a decent bit. But this one is really up to you, but this would be at least the standard build that I would recommend for anybody picking up Deathstalker for Mythic Plus and AoE content. As for the actual hero spec challenge changes, the buff for the plague damage is mostly passive, and when adjusted from Trickster into Deathstalker, you will also notice that there's still a lot of more passives compared to Trickster in terms of the gameplay functionality. There are a few passives that will change your rotation slightly, but I mean very slightly. For the most part, we have things like Singular Focus, dealing AoE damage to all other targets, also splashes back onto a marked target by a little, auto attacks deal additional plague damage, we got to scrub the blood, which buffs our Rupture, there's some executed potential Fatal Intent, but then we have abilities like Clear the Witness, where after you consume your Deathstalker's mark, or rather while you reapply it, your next Shuriken Storm will deal additional plague damage and generate calm points. This one is just something you'll want to consume whenever it is up outside of your dances, but it's fairly easy to play around with as it generates a decent bit of calm points. And finally, we have the Capstone, where after you consume the final use of your death mark, whether it is from Eviscerate or any other finisher really, you will gain additional energy, and your next Eviscer deals 60% more damage and is a guaranteed critical strike, so it's worth using it. You basically just want to make sure you're consuming this buff as often as you can whenever it is available, just to make sure that you're not really sitting on this buff. This also allows you to shift your mark from one target to another, like if you just shift a focus target from one to the next, but it is something you want to track and watch out for. And the Subtlety, you go through finishers very quickly, so this is going to be up quite regularly. When it comes to the choice nodes, there's not really a lot of good options. Ethereal Cloak is fine in raids, or you could go bait and switch for Mythic Plus. I really like this one as Assassination, and it works super well defensively for Subtlety as well. Over here we have Lingering Darkness. That one seems like the best choice, at least right now numerically. Here, Shadewalker or Shroud of Night, either one works. Shadewalker just gives you a little bit more mobility. The middle choice, however, is an interesting one with AoE. Either Momentum of Despair, whenever you crit with Shuriken Storm, increases your crit chance and crit damage of your Shuriken Storm, and Black Powder by a set amount, but for 12 seconds. This one can be kind of good if you have a decent bit of crit on your character. Though, comparatively though, you could also pick up Follow the Blood instead, where Shuriken Storm and Black Powder deal 30% additional damage while 2 or more enemies afflicted by Rupture. For the most part, in raids and single target environments, Momentum of Despair seems to be like a decent choice. Though technically you could make an argument for Follow the Blood in AoE, especially when it comes to regularly using a Black Powder within a dungeon situation. This one, I feel like you could play around with and pick either one, honestly. Deathstalker is still a very fresh new build for Subtlety. Nobody's really figured out the best meta pick and meta build so far, and I've seen a lot of different talent builds and dungeons playing either one of these two talents, so this one you're more than welcome to experiment with. But if you're not sure, Momentum of Despair has some single target value because you will be using Shuriken Storm. in single target once every blue moon. So when that Shuriken Storm crits and deals additional crit damage, then you get some benefits there, but also that crit and critical strike damage also works out for AoE, whereas Follow the Blood is mostly there for single target. And rotationally, not a lot is really changed about this build except in AoE content. The only thing that I mentioned before, you will have to watch out for procs that Clear the Witness, which you'll primarily will want to use outside of your dances, but also your capstone with Darkness Night. This is when you want to consume as soon as possible, and you have to have full 7 calm points available in order to consume that buff fully. That is going to be one and only requirement, is making sure that you have to spend and build all the way to 7 calm points, which is Subtlety as a spec that generates a ton of calm points very rapidly. That really won't be that difficult for you to do, but it is something that you'll have to watch out for. Like if you are in a situation where you build 6 calm points, normally every bone in your body as Subtlety would scream, okay, that's more than enough calm points, but into finisher you may need to just spend one more backstep just to generate one extra calm point, just to make sure you have 7 to consume the buff. It is generally worth it, even though it can kind of feel like it breaks your rotation a little bit, but it is something that it's pretty easy to get used to. Outside of this, in single target, the playstyle of Deathstalker doesn't really change too much. Where it does change a little bit is in AoE. So in AoE, outside of dances, you will want to be a little bit more careful about trying to dot up enemies with your Rupture, especially if you're playing with like the talent of Dark Brew in particular. The more enemies you have blood up, the better. Ideally, you should have everybody blood up before you have your proper go with an AoE content. Outside of this, though, your finishers do change. With the significant buff to Black Powder, you will now ideally want to use Black Powder on 2 or more targets. It is more efficient than spamming Eviscerate. The only time you will really use Eviscerate is to make sure that you're capitalizing on your actual capstone buff in order to consume it whenever it is available. Outside of that, Black Powder is kind of like your go-to option in a lot of the AoE cases. It is a much stronger of an ability, and you will want to try to keep up with it as best as possible. And this also applies even when you have dance available. So outside of dances, you're focused on bleeding enemies up and then building calm points as efficiently as possible, using it on either Eviscerates for your capstone or Black Powder outside of AoE. But even inside of dances, you will want to start using Black Powder fairly regularly, because it's actually a really good button to use in general. The only time where you'll not be using Black Powder is whenever you need to consume the Eviscerate, but if you are fighting more than 2 targets, even with dance available, yeah, then you'll actually still want to spam Black Powder as much as humanly possible, because it is more than worth the damage that it provides. But besides this, however, if you are, I guess, familiar with the Subtlety basic rotation, that's really about the only changes you'll have. Black Powder becomes a lot more of an important ability that you will want to prioritize fairly regularly, making sure to bleed up enemies if you're playing the Dark Brew playstyle. Also, it's going to have to be pretty higher priority, making sure to land those Eviscerates to consume your capstone for Deathstalker, also higher priority. Outside of that, however, Subtlety kind of returns back to an older playstyle that you might have experienced back in like the last expansion of Dragonflight, or maybe one before that in the Shadowlands. So it's actually kind of familiar if you've played the spec in the past. But playing around with Deathstalker, I found it's incredibly easy in pure single target. In a raiding environment, it is an incredibly good playstyle that anyone can get into. I feel like it's a little bit less minutia tracking compared to Trickster, which is trying to really maximize the full value of its capstone. Deathstalker does not necessarily need to be doing that nearly as much, because your capstone and that playstyle is very single target friendly. The Eviscerates and how much damage those can do can be incredibly fun. So far, I've been able to get about a 6 million hit for an Eviscerate. I think I can go higher if I had better setup and better setup for trinkets specifically. So this one is incredibly fun, is trying to see how high of an Eviscerate crits you can get, because you can really synergize all of your cooldowns. It is a surprisingly fun playstyle to play in pure single target. In AoE, however, the playstyle of Deathstalker is going to be a lot more spread damage rather than funnel damage, and that becomes very important for the current meta of Mythic Plus. Technically, based on the numbers that I've seen and the sims and the logs, I think the potential for Deathstalker Subtlety to do incredible AoE damage is very high. I mean, there's some numbers out there that are blowing Assassination Rogues out of the water, which is the current preferred spec choice for Mythic Plus for the most part. So the amount of potential damage you can do with Subtlety is really high. However, as I said, the current meta right now is very much all about priority damage, doing as much AoE damage while being able to single out a powerful enemy within a dungeon. Every dungeon has one of those elites that's just a lot more threatening than everything else around them. all those other ads have to die. But that priority ad needs to be focused on and nuked as soon as possible. This is why, if you're playing Subtlety, Trickster is a little bit better because you have better priority focused damage, or you just switch over to Assassination, which is amazing priority damage, absolutely able to dumpster a single foe while cleaving everything around it for free. So Deathstalker, I don't really know how it's going to fit in that type of meta, because technically you can do priority damage, but you're sacrificing a lot of AoE for it. That's where I think Deathstalker may end up falling behind, is just how strong prio damage is in the current meta for Mythic Plus and how it's preferred, where the prio damage is not really a problem in raid situations because you can just spec for a pure single target build like most Subtlety rogues would. But in terms of pure AoE and prio, you kind of have to pick as Deathstalker, which I think would give this playstyle a very good credence in certain dungeons, but maybe somebody will figure out a better build that's a little bit better at the prio that allows Deathstalker to truly shine. But like I said, it's a brand new playstyle that is just picking up steam, mostly because of the recent buffs, so it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves and where it goes forward. But if anything, it is definitely fun, and to some degree I think it's a little bit easier to get into than having to manage all the different buffs and procs of Trickster. And if you're someone who wants to play Subtlety Rogue or Rogue in general with a big focus on mad AoE damage, then I think Deathstalker will be the spec for you. Or if you're someone who just want to get on a Rogue, you're not quite feeling Assassination, but you still want to play someone easy, I would say Deathstalker Subtlety is one of the easier specs right now to get into if you are interested in raiding content, specifically in the War Within expansion. But with that, that's going to be our entire update to the Deathstalker Subtlety as of the patch 11.05. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this update video. If you did enjoy this little guide or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. It would very much appreciated. Join our Discord community if you want to get the written version of the Subtlety guide with all of the recent Deathstalker adjustments. Also, let me know what your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.